operates on multiple levels, and we need to figure out ways to increase those levels. Let's assume for a moment that we could never obtain a resource-based economy, hypothetically. Let's assume for a moment that that's just not going to happen. Does that mean the values of the movement are not applicable? Does that mean that promoting the idea that we should relate things to physical reference to the planet and using science can't be also utilized in detached ways? Does that mean that the philosophy of taking everything into account and understanding people's indoctrinations and what generates aberrant behavior, does that mean all of that information is thrown out the window if we cannot obtain a resource-based economy? The point at hand is that we're shaping behavior all the time. And even if we affect one person in a way that enlightens their worldview to see each other more as equals, to see the need to be sustainable with a direct physical referent, to listen to the natural world and appreciate what the beauty of science has to offer about the world we live in and about how we view the world. If we can simply get one person to take that view, I think we've hit a unique accomplishment. So keep that in mind a little bit when you think about what your involvement in the movement actually is. Realize that it's a multifaceted position of influence. There's no end game. It's not just, a resource-based economy. We're doing something of a cultural significance that I think is deeply profound and transitional in our educational processes. And this is probably self-evident to most of you out there, but I feel the need to state it. So there it is. Okay, what else do I have here? All right, let's jump briefly into the circus. The circus, as I've stated prior, is these individuals and groups out there that pretty much do whatever they can to engage in harassment and defamation of the movement or myself, that have no critical thought in any of their analysis whatsoever. The question is, how do you differentiate between people that have a legitimate and intellectually honest objection, such as Stefan from Free Domain Radio? He's very honest in what he believes, not that I agree, but it's there. And I'm going to talk about some other points with respect to the economic calculation problem that he often brings up in a moment. But how do you differentiate between those that are really sincere and those that are completely full of shit and that are there simply to harass and to cause problems? And obviously you enter in a very, very bizarre gray area due to the different natures, due to the level of indoctrination and the gullibility of certain people on certain levels. The circus consists essentially of two different tactics. And if you can recognize these tactics, then you can differentiate very, very easily. Even though you will have, again, a gray area with people that just are not educated at all and they jump to conclusions based on surface associations that they've seen on YouTube or on some blog. And since they magnify their current value system, they simply repeat it and parrot it. And they honestly believe it just because they parrot it, but that isn't really critical, and that's more of a byproduct of the circus as opposed to what the circus actually is. The circus can be identified by, one, surface associations, prima facie associations. These are associations drawn with no background connection whatsoever. So, for example, Alex Jones goes on the air and says that the Zeitgeist movement is a New World Order theosophic cult, and the only evidence he shows for this is the use of Jiddu Krishnamurti, the evidence of Jiddu Krishnamurti, who used to be involved in the Theosophic Society. I never even knew what the Theosophic Society was until someone brought it up to me, by the way. And so, boom, now we have this whole subculture of people that go around saying, not only are we theosophists, because Jiddu Krishnamurti opened up my first film, who, by the way, was not a theosophist and actually rejected theosophy. But then it gets tied to even more prima facie associations, such as the New World Order, one of the most meaningless concepts out there to date, such as, anything that's associated with anti-religion in some traditional sense, Satanistic, Luciferian, New World Order, Theosophic. If anyone's been in the movement for long enough or has experienced criticisms, well, I wouldn't call them criticisms, belligerent objections against my talks on religion and things such, has come into this rhetoric. But it is a classic case in point of surface associations that don't relate to anything. For example, if I make a comment about H.G. Wells, and I comment on the fact that he's, of course, a prolific science fiction writer and a political thinker, and with someone like that who's so prolific and has such intensity, you can't reduce him to some, small objection that he's a Nazi, he's a fascist. Anybody who can think remotely clearly can see that it's a very complex individual with very complex intents. Some of them worth noting, some of them not. Some of them are absolutely horrific. Some of them are worth critical thought. This is the case with just about any intellectual throughout history. But the surface associations rail. So no longer is H.G. Wells a science fiction writer famous for the Invisible Man and all these other ideas. No, he's the author of The New World Order. Well, what is the New World Order? The book he wrote many years ago. New World Order is an attempt, and I'd say a very objectionable one. I don't particularly like it, but his intent is actually quite positive. Now, and here's where it gets amusing, and the circus kicks in. For me to say that to some people is Antichrist. Some people hate H.G. Wells so much that to even say his name and to even say anything remotely critical of him that isn't a defamation is some type of atrocious assault on humanity. And this is how this association works. I'm trying to think of some other examples of this that I've seen recently. And, I don't want to belabor it because it's so juvenile, but it is important to recognize. So, number one, prima facie superficial associations. Associations drawn that make no sense whatsoever when you actually look into the evidence. And this is unfortunately how many people who object to the Zeitgeist movement or my films, which of course have nothing to do with the Zeitgeist movement in and of themselves, they draw connections that don't exist. Now, I want to give another example that's a little bit less belligerent but equally as biased, and it was an article that was written after Zeitgeist Moving Forward came out. And the article was called Brave New World by Michelle Goldberg at tabletmag.com, which apparently, from what I can tell in a very surface sense, it says a new read on Jewish life. I suppose it has to do with Jewish culture. Now, it says Brave New World, and this is what it reads as the headline. The Zeitgeist movement is the first internet-based apocalyptic cult centered around a doomsday-proclaiming film and an ideology filled with classic anti-Semitic tropes. I'm not shitting you. This is really what's written. And the difference between this and a lot of the directly belligerent detractors that call us New World Order is that this woman obviously is serious. So this is the gray area I'm talking about with the circus. And I want to talk about, she really believes this shit. So let's go through this a little bit just to show what you all can expect through time as these different mind-lock mentalities come forward. She goes through this article, and she tries to find anything she can to create an anti-Semitic contour. And she uses highly derogatory statements. She doesn't actually reference any of the data put forward in Zeitgeist Moving Forward. There's absolutely no critical analysis whatsoever. What she does is take everything and lock it straight back to the first film and different people that were noted in that film. For example, and again, I'm not belaboring this as a criticism of the article, even though I could go crazy with the stupidity of it. But what it is a case example of this prima facie association, superficial, non-critical thought, nonsense coming from these people that have an identity to preserve. But she goes in and says, for example, Charles Lindbergh, who was used in the film, who wrote the book about the money trust, talking about how the powers of the money trust in the early 20th century were consolidating power, and they were playing games for their own self-interest. A lot of Part 3 of Zeitgeist, the movie, was of his reports on this issue. He never makes a fucking comment on Jews. He doesn't make any comment whatsoever. The propaganda back then was to say, oh, if you're against anything oriented with money, and if anyone in that party happens to be Jewish, boom, you must be anti-Semitic. And this game is being played even today, unfortunately. So she throws name drops. Charles Lindbergh, who, by the way, was not anti-Semitic at all. You have to remember the period of time you're dealing with and the propaganda surrounding these issues. But then she brings up Mullins and LaRouche, and then Alex Jones, and then brings in Jared Loughner, and then everything she could possibly combine to give the worst possible view with this underpinning that somehow it's anti-Semitic. In fact, she uses quote, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories as a resolution to one of her sentences in reference to the film, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But this is all she sees. This is all she can relate to. This is all she knows. So somehow and she actually literally implies this in the thing, I am apparently anti-Semitic because these people are in the film. Now, you'll notice that at the very beginning of Zeitgeist 1, there's Trungpa Rinpoche. Does that mean I'm a Buddhist? You'll notice that there's Jordan Maxwell. Does that mean I believe that aliens are essentially what's behind the meaning of the Judeo-Christian Bible, which is partially what he talks about? Lyndon LaRouche, quick sample, Mullins. This individual isn't even actually sourced in the final sourcing. These are third-party sources. These people think like this. They say, oh, if I can find anything in this structure that relates to something that the public will see as problematic or hate-oriented or in the history of crime or anything that's objectionable, and the favorites, of course, are Nazism and Marxism and all of these things. If they can find any relationship whatsoever, they run with it with no critical thought whatsoever. So if you want a case study of what prima facie associations orient with this just a belligerent weirdo named Michelle Goldberg, read this article and you will get just a wonderful wonderful sense of what people do to protect their identity and to completely avoid everything with respect to what the communication actually entails. Now that is the art of prima facie superficial associations. And if you understand that tactic, you'll see it everywhere. Everywhere. It's the foundation of the circus. Reverse racism has become very, very problematic in the world today. I'm nothing but scared. I'm scared when I see things like parades for different races. I get scared when I see people, quote, take pride and have this sort of jingoistic relationship to their race, which they had no control over. They've done nothing for. It is an arbitrary distinction which is scientifically invalid. You can have a Puerto Rican Day parade. You can have Black Awareness Month. Well, where's the White Person Day? That would seem kind of weird, wouldn't it, considering the white person has been the most objectionable individual in the history of time, And I will state as a final point when it comes to this tablet article, the only racism is coming from Michelle Goldberg. Flagrant, defensive racism on her part. No critical thought. And if you want to challenge people, by the way, if you get into this with people, tell them to define their terms. So, okay, the Zeitgeist movement is anti-Semitic. Why? Because the first film of the guy who founded it sourced somebody who was accused of anti-Semitism? I mean, that's basically all she has. I mean, if you break them down, it becomes very, very easy to call them out on their bullshit, but they won't accept the call out. They'll just get frustrated and walk away. That's what they all do. You go up to Alex Jones and say, Alex Jones, why is the Zeitgeist movement, quote, New World Order? And he'll give you this long list of prima facie associations. Or better yet, we'll get a little bit more causal here. Why is the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project, more specifically, communism? Ooh, well, it's the property issue. Again, there's a rationale for the property issue that you won't find anywhere in Marxism. There is the class issue. Again, there's a scientific rationale for the class issue you won't find anywhere in Marxism. There is the need to have a physical referent for everything that you do, to have a system of distribution and production based on what's possible and what's most efficient, as opposed to this flagrant movement of price efficiency, which has no relationship to anything. And again, I'll talk about the economic calculation problem when I get to the Q&A that so many of these free market economists love to harp about. All right, so I'm already behind schedule here. The second point I wanted to make with regard to, quote, the circus has to do with straw men and irrational projections, or even irrelevant projections. And you'll find this tactic occurring quite a bit as well, both in a genuine sense and in a very disingenuous sense. For example, recently someone decided that if the Zeitgeist movement was implemented or transition commenced, it would erupt in violence. And they set up the straw man, and I've actually heard this numerous times, that suddenly some power goes around stealing everyone's property. And if you don't want to be in a resource-based economy, you'll be forced to be in the resource-based economy. Now, this isn't something that we've talked about at length in the movement, even though I have had conversations with Jacques on just this issue. And I will go ahead and resolve the issue for you really fast. Just as we have the Amish living today, just as you have people still living in the Amazon jungle, anyone that